This is the Marxists at the Movies podcast.
Scene opens, white lights dim down low. The cinema whispers where truths can grow. From shadows deep and screens ignite, the proletariat comes alive tonight. Marxists at the movies, bright and raw, breaking through the reels to rewrite the law. Workers of the world in every frame, changing the credits, rewriting the name.
All right, comrades, gather round. Another transmission beaming out Marxists at the movies. And let me tell you, today's a special one. We're not just skimming the surface. Oh no, today we're plunging headfirst into a real cinematic gem. A film that, well, it just consistently, it invigorates our critical thinking, but also it warms the cockles of our collective heart.
Right. This one's not just another flick on the watch list. It's a film we find ourselves returning to time and time again. Each viewing, it's like it reveals new layers, new dimensions, and kind of reaffirms why it's so damn powerful.
You know, before we get too deep into this, before we really start unpacking the dialectical baggage, so to speak, I got to throw out a little disclaimer, a crucial one.
Oh, absolutely.
To any of our comrades out there, any fellow travelers who haven't yet had the pleasure, the joy, the revolutionary experience of witnessing this masterpiece.
Fear not.
Fear not. Our analysis today, our deep dive, it's going to be strictly spoiler-free. We wouldn't dream of robbing anyone of that pristine first encounter, right?
Absolutely. We want everyone to approach this film, unburdened by any prior knowledge of the narrative. Twists and turns, let their own interpretation, let it flower, let it bloom.
So the film we're dissecting today, comrades, the film we're putting under our Marxist and queer microscopes, if you will, is none other than Steven Spielberg's 1982 masterpiece, E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial.
A classic.
A classic indeed. And, our specific objective, our guiding light for this deep dive, is to unpack a zoom-in perspective. It's one that's beautifully articulated in this brilliant article. I'm holding it right here. E.T., a queer and trans allegory.
A fantastic piece of scholarship.
It is. It really digs deep. And we're going to be using this text alongside a whole constellation of other critical resources to really unearth, the kind of shimmering layer of meaning, the subtext, the things that are bubbling beneath the surface of this seemingly simple, tale of a boy and his alien pal.
It's about taking that dominant read and that surface level interpretation and really subjecting it to some serious scrutiny, revealing how the film's deeper themes, how they actually resonate with experiences of marginalization, and the constant struggle for recognition.
Precisely. Which brings us to you, our astute listeners, our comrades in thought.
Yeah.
Have you ever, if you really sat down and considered E.T. beyond its widely accepted narrative, the heartwarming tale of childhood wonder and interspecies friendship. Today we're going to be dissecting some seriously compelling arguments that might just fundamentally reshape your entire understanding of this beloved cultural artifact. Maybe even challenge some of your deeply held assumptions. Who knows?
And we've gathered a mountain of material for this analysis, haven't we?
Oh, we have. We've been up to our elbows in critical essays, the kind that really burrow deep into the film's ideological underbelly. We've got queer reviews that offer these refreshingly alternative interpretations, reflections on interviews with the filmmakers themselves. Sometimes those off-the-cuff remarks, they reveal more than they intend.
Absolutely.
And of course, we can't forget the aesthetic elements. The cinematography, the way Spielberg uses the camera, it's like poetry. And that iconic score, those swelling strings, courtesy of our comrade John Williams.
Oh, masterful.
Masterful indeed. These diverse sources, they weave together a real rich tapestry. They help us understand why this film has captivated audiences for decades. And they provide the tools to decode its narrative, but through a critical lens. Through the lens of our revolutionary struggle.
Exactly, precisely.
So our mission, our revolutionary duty, comrades, is to really rigorously examine, to dissect, to explore the case for a queer and trans reading of E.T. We're going to try to understand how this film, this seemingly simple film intended for a family audience, resonates so powerfully, so deeply with experiences of feeling like an outsider, feeling alienated, of yearning for belonging in a world that often feels hostile to difference, and, well, the revolutionary potential of genuine connection, the kind that transcends, the boundaries and binaries imposed by the capitalist system.
Right. That yearning for connection, it's so universal, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Okay, comrades, let's begin our deconstruction, shall we?
Let's dismantle this masterpiece.
All right, so let's start with the main attraction himself, E.T., the extraterrestrial wonder. Now, that article I mentioned, E.T., Queer and Trans Allegory, it makes a really potent argument, right? It argues that E.T.'s very existence, his being, can be seen as embodying otherness. And not just any otherness, but the kind that resonates deeply with the lived experiences of queer, trans, autistic, and neurodivergent folks. Those who exist outside the narrow confines of what society deems normal.
It's about recognizing those parallels, isn't it? Seeing how the film reflects the experiences of those who are often pushed to the margins, those who don't fit neatly into those predefined boxes.
Precisely. And the article, it's so astute. It points out how E.T.'s physical form, how he's described as soft, strange, sexless. And this is crucial, comrades. They say he doesn't pass. Now, that phrase, doesn't pass, it's loaded, especially when we think about the immense pressure that trans individuals face to conform to cisgender expectations. And it makes you think, doesn't it, about how the bodies and ways of being of so many trans and neurodivergent comrades are constantly under scrutiny, pathologized, seen as deviant or even dangerous by the dominant ideology.
It's a way of controlling those who are perceived as different, isn't it? Of enforcing conformity.
Absolutely. It's a tactic of the bourgeois, of the capitalist machine.
Yeah.
Now, what I find really fascinating is how the article doesn't stop there. It goes deeper. It connects this analysis to E.T.'s communication style. He doesn't speak our language, right? He doesn't follow our social cues. And his sensitivity, his deep emotional sensitivity, that's not just an alien quirk, comrades. It's a reflection of the diverse ways that people who exist outside the rigid confines of what's considered neurotypical or cisgender, how they navigate a world that's often hostile, a world that doesn't understand them, a world that often punishes difference.
And the reaction to this otherness, it's a pattern we see repeated throughout history, isn't it? The state, the institutions, the powers that be, they don't see the inherent worth, the beauty of difference. They just see a problem, a threat, something to be contained, controlled, studied. And it's no coincidence that this mirrors how marginalized communities, whether we're talking about queer folks, people of color, disabled individuals, how they've been historically treated, medicalized, criminalized, institutionalized.
Oh, it's a tale as old as time, comrade. And E.T., he's got that, that glowing heart, right?
Yeah.
It's like a prominent visual in the film, a recurring motif. But it's not a weapon. It's not about aggression. It's not about power over others. This article gives a really compelling interpretation of that glowing heart. It suggests that it's a metaphor for emotional depth, for inner truth, for a visibility that isn't always safe, especially under the watchful eye, the constant surveillance of the ruling class.
Absolutely. It speaks to the resilience of the oppressed, the strength it takes to be yourself, to be your true self in a world that wants to mold you, wants to shape you, wants to fit you into a predetermined mold.
And now, let's shift our focus, comrades. Let's consider Elliot, the young protagonist who forms this incredible bond with E.T. The article describes him as, well, a classic soft boy, empathetic, intuitive, and crucially, lonely. He's an outsider too, right? Navigating the wreckage of a broken family, a casualty of capitalist alienation. It's no coincidence that Spielberg himself, he was dealing with the fallout of his own parents' divorce when he made this film.
So the personal is political, as they say.
Absolutely, always. But what's so insightful about this allegorical reading is how it highlights that Elliot, he finds a kindred spirit in E.T. Their connection, it transcends language. It's this deep, almost telepathic understanding. It's about recognizing that shared sense of otherness. And it speaks to the possibility of genuine human connection, a connection that goes beyond those superficial differences that society tries to use to divide us.
Right, those categories, those labels, they're tools of the oppressor designed to keep us separated.
Exactly. And Elliot's actions, he hides E.T. in his closet, literally the closet. He cares for him in secret. These are acts of quiet rebellion. It's a child resisting the perceived norms, the potential violence of the adult world, of the system. A powerful metaphor, wouldn't you say?
Oh, incredibly powerful. It speaks to the ways in which resistance often has to operate under the radar, especially when the forces of oppression are so pervasive.
And, his love for E.T., it's unconditional. It's a stark contrast to the fear and hostility that the authorities exhibit. Elliot, he doesn't try to assimilate E.T., he doesn't try to force him into some predefined category. He embraces him, differences and all.
Which brings us to the arrival of the government agents, doesn't it? That pivotal moment in the film where the forces of institutional power, they descend upon this quiet suburban home.
Ah, yes. The ominous arrival of the white coats, as they're often called.
Right. And the allegory interprets this intrusion, this invasion, as the very embodiment of the state, of the system, enforcing conformity. Anything that deviates from the norm, anything that challenges the established order, it's seen as a danger, a threat. And this resonates, doesn't it, with the way systems built on power and control, they operate.
It does. And the visual language here, it's so deliberate. You've got the sterile white coats, the tubes, the gurneys, the whole clinical apparatus. It evokes this sense of detachment, of control, of a lack of empathy. And as the allegory points out, it mirrors the way that trans, queer, and disabled bodies have been and continue to be medicalized, pathologized, seen as something to be fixed, to be managed, to be controlled.
And it's all about maintaining a sense of order, isn't it? Of suppressing anything that might disrupt the dominant narrative.
Absolutely. But what's so inspiring, so exhilarating, is that this sets the stage for that iconic escape, right? That breathtaking bicycle flight. It's not just spectacle, comrades. It's a moment of euphoria, of queer transcendence.
Oh, absolutely. It's liberation, pure and simple. The shackles of societal constraints of gravity itself, they're broken.
And it's a collective act of defiance, isn't it? You've got Elliot, his brother, their friends. They all rally around E.T. Their love, their solidarity, it literally lifts them above those oppressive forces that are trying to contain them.
And the allegory, it quotes this incredibly poignant line here. It's what happens when you dare to believe in your own difference and someone else believes in it too. That shared belief, that mutual recognition, it's the key to breaking free.
I get chills just thinking about it. It's such a powerful visual representation of breaking free from the limitations of a world that wants to define you, wants to categorize you, wants to control you.
And then, of course, there's the goodbye. That heart-wrenching farewell, but it's not a goodbye forever, is it? E.T., he makes this promise. He says, "I'll be right here," pointing to Elliot's head.
It's about memory, isn't it? About the enduring power of connection. And for trans and neurodivergent individuals, the allegory argues, this moment holds a particular significance. It speaks to the profound experience of being seen, of being understood, of having your identity recognized and validated. And that recognition, that validation, it becomes a part of you, a part of your story.
It's internalizing that acceptance, carrying it with you, even when the world tries to tell you otherwise.
Exactly. And it ties into this idea of chosen family, which is so central to queer communities. Those bonds of love and support that we create, that we choose, they can be even stronger, even more meaningful than those we're born into.
Absolutely. And this theme of found family, of lasting impact, it's further underscored by the inclusion of Michael Jackson's song, "Someone in the Dark."
Oh, right. The song from the E.T. Storybook album. It's a beautiful song. Haunting, even.
And the lyrics, they speak of this deep longing for connection, for belonging. And when you consider Jackson's own life, his struggles with fame, with feeling isolated and misunderstood, the allegory suggests that this song, it becomes a kind of unintentional trans lullaby, offering comfort and validation to those who feel marginalized, those who feel different.
It's a beautiful way to put it. A trans lullaby.
Yeah.
It adds this whole other dimension to the film's resonance.
It does.
Now let's turn our attention to the film's aesthetic elements, the cinematography, the way Spielberg uses the camera to tell the story. Because when you view it through a trans lens, as the allegory suggests, it reveals some fascinating choices.
Oh, absolutely. For instance, the use of low-angle shots, placing the camera at Elliot's eye level. That's not just a stylistic flourish. It's about centering the child's perspective. We experience the world as he does.
Right. We see the adults, those figures of authority. They loom large, they're intimidating, often faceless. And this visual choice, it reflects how marginalized children, particularly trans and neurodivergent youth, how they often perceive the adult world. A world that can feel oppressive, a world that doesn't always see them, a world that doesn't always understand.
And then there's the use of light and shadow. The way E.T. is often shrouded in darkness, it creates this aura of mystery, of vulnerability. It subverts the traditional monster movie trope, right? The alien as a threat. Here, the so-called monster, he's gentle, he's misunderstood.
And the government agents, they're initially depicted as these shadowy figures, faceless and menacing. They represent the impersonal forces of the state, the system, rather than individuals.
And the harsh lighting during the raid scene, it further emphasizes that sense of invasion, of violation.
The color palette, too, it plays a significant role. The warm, earthy tones that are associated with Elliot's home, with the forest, with that magical bike ride, they evoke this sense of safety, of connection, of authentic being. And it's a stark contrast to the cold, sterile whites and blues of the government equipment, the uniforms.
Right. It highlights that tension between the warmth of genuine human connection and the cold, detached nature of institutional power.
And nighttime, it becomes this sacred space in the film. So many crucial moments of connection, of vulnerability, of transformation, they unfold under the cover of darkness.
It's a space of possibility, isn't it? And for many queer and trans youth, nighttime can be a sanctuary, a time to explore their identities, to dream, to find respite from a world that might not always be welcoming.
Absolutely. And speaking of sanctuary, we have to talk about that iconic image, that breathtaking shot of the bicycle flying against the backdrop of the moon. I mean, it's visually stunning, no doubt. But when viewed through this trans lens, it becomes something more. It becomes a symbol of liberation.
Of transcendence, of breaking free from the constraints of the physical world, from the limitations imposed by society.
And the close-ups, the way Spielberg lingers on Elliot and E.T.'s faces, they're so intimate. They allow us to really connect with their emotions, their joy, their fear, their sadness. It's a powerful reminder that even in a film about an alien, it's the human connection that truly resonates.
It is. And, it's remarkable, especially for a film of that era, that it gives such weight, such respect to the emotional lives of young boys.
Now, comrades, let's delve into some even deeper waters, shall we? Let's explore a psychoanalytic queer reading of the film. This perspective, it really challenges those traditional heteronormative interpretations.
It does. And one of the key points here is the absence of the father figure in Elliot's family. It disrupts that classic Oedipal narrative that we often see in coming-of-age stories.
Right, that Freudian framework.
Exactly. And into that void steps E.T., whose biological sex and gender presentation are deliberately ambiguous. And this ambiguity, as the allegory points out, it allows the children in the film to engage in a kind of gender play. They project their own ideas about gender onto him.
They're not constrained by those rigid categories.
Right. And there's a fascinating reference here to Foucault's work on Herculean Barbon, a historical figure who lived outside the male-female binary. And like Herculean, E.T. defies easy categorization.
It's a beautiful parallel. And when you look at Eliot's intense connection with E.T. through this psychoanalytic lens, it allows you to consider, how his desires, his emotional energies, might be directed in ways that go beyond those traditional models of, heterosexual attraction.
It forces us to question the very nature of desire and connection, doesn't it?
It does. And interestingly, this perspective, it also sees the film's seemingly happy ending. With E.T.'s departure and the potential reintegration of a father figure as a bit of a tragic turn, because it could be interpreted as a kind of erasure, a closing off of those queer possibilities.
Right, a return to the status quo. But the key point here is that even with that seemingly conventional resolution, the film retains what the allegory calls a queer meaning potential.
Those subversive interpretations, they linger.
They do. And they allow viewers, especially those who identify as queer or trans, to engage with the film on a much deeper level.
It's important, though, that we consider Spielberg's own intentions, right? He stated that the story was inspired by his feelings about his parents' divorce. And initially, he imagined E.T. as a more plant-like creature without a defined gender.
So the personal informs the political, once again.
Always. But Spielberg, he's also emphasized the universal nature of storytelling, the idea that viewers bring their own experiences, their own baggage to the films they watch. And that leads to different, sometimes unexpected interpretations.
He welcomes those multiple readings.
He does. And there's this interesting anecdote. He and John Williams, they were worried that audiences wouldn't accept E.T.'s appearance. They thought he was too strange, too different.
Which is ironic, considering the film's message of embracing difference.
It is. Now, before we wrap up, let's touch on a few specific scenes and their potential for queer subtext. For example, that Dungeons and Dragons scene at the beginning. Some critics have interpreted it as a space for those boys to explore their identities, their burgeoning sense of self. And there are hints, subtle hints of homoerotic undertones in their interactions.
Right, that playful banter, that sense of intimacy.
And the setting, that old gardening shed, it's a classic coming-of-age location, a space of transition and discovery. And it's where Elliot first encounters E.T., a space where their connection is born.
And Elliot's insistence that E.T. is a boy, despite his sister's uncertainty, that could be seen as an act of assigning a gender identity, of claiming ownership over E.T.'s narrative and resisting the scientist's attempts to dehumanize him.
And that getting drunk scene, the one where Elliot starts mimicking E.T.'s intoxication while watching a John Wayne movie, it's wonderfully ambiguous. It's never explicitly stated whose desires are being mirrored there.
It's open to interpretation.
It is. And finally, that rainbow at the end as E.T. spaceship takes off. Some queer commentators have interpreted it as an intentional symbol of gay solidarity.
A visual affirmation of the film's queer themes.
It's a striking image,
Oh,
and it lingers in the mind long after the film ends.
it does.
And just to throw in a few bits of trivia, E.T., it was a huge success, the highest grossing film of 1982. It had a massive cultural impact. Reese's Pieces sales skyrocketed. Neil Diamond even wrote a song about it.
Oh, I remember that song.
And, it took a village to bring E.T. to life. They used a combination of puppetry, a short stuntman, and this amazing boy who was born without legs. But he had this incredible ability to move using his hands. So you had all these different bodies contributing to this single character.
That's fascinating.
It is. And Michael Jackson, he was so moved by the film that he bought one of the E.T. puppets, and he actually wept while narrating the audiobook. And the film, it received critical acclaim, commercial success. It held the record for the most profitable sci-fi film for years until Titanic came along. So, yeah, it's safe to say it left its mark.
Absolutely. A landmark achievement.
So, comrades, let's take a step back and consider what we've unpacked here today. We've explored the compelling arguments for E.T. as a queer and trans allegory. We've looked at E.T.'s embodiment of otherness, Elliot's empathy and rebellion, the role of institutional power, the power of transcendence, and the enduring importance of chosen family.
And we've examined how the film's cinematic language, its visual choices, contribute to these interpretations.
Exactly. So, to our listeners, we ask you this. Does viewing E.T. through this lens, does it change your understanding? Does it deepen your appreciation for this film? And what other films, what other stories might hold these hidden layers, these subversive messages?
It's a question worth pondering, and if you're interested in exploring this further, I encourage you to seek out some of those essays we mentioned. They offer a really rich and nuanced analysis of the film.
Here's a final thought to leave you with. Maybe, just maybe, the magic of E.T. lies not just in its heartwarming story of friendship, but in its ability to reflect the full spectrum of human experience, the joys, the sorrows, the struggles, the triumphs. And maybe, just maybe, it offers a vision of a world where difference is celebrated, not feared. A world where connection transcends those artificial boundaries that society tries to impose upon us.
A world worth fighting for.
Absolutely. And with that, comrades, we conclude our deep dive. Until next time, this has been Marxists at the Movies.
Scene opens, white lights dim down low.
Thank you for listening to the Marxists at the Movies podcast.
Whispers where
Don't
truths
forget
can
to like
grow.
and comment.
From shadows deep and screens ignite, the proletariat comes alive tonight. Marxists at the movies, bright and raw, breaking through the reels to rewrite the law. Workers of the world in every frame, changing the credits.